Chapter 3, Return to the Summit. The war was over at last. It was October 1945 when we set out for Colorado. While in Washington, Max had formed, with two other foresters, a logging company known as Farm Foresters, Inc. Logging was top priority during the war. Often during those war years, I'd pull the children in their little wagon down to the banks of the Columbia River. From there, we would watch the huge Russian freighters almost every day loading timbers from the local sawmills. All of this went gratis from the U.S. to the Soviet Union. Sometimes a U.S. ship would be loading pilings used for building bridges. Max liked to think that maybe the pilings he'd logged would be used for our troops, especially the ski troops at the Anzio beachhead in Italy. Max bought a logging truck and bulldozer, which he called the Cat. It was a Caterpillar tractor. He sold his interest in the portable sawmill, which had been used to go from farm to farm. Earl Ganong, a skier friend we'd met at Longview during this time, ran the small portable mill. When we weren't tied up with our two little ones, Edna Ganong and I would join Max and Earl and drive up to the base of Mount St. Helens. From there, we would climb to the ski club cabin and spend the night. Early the next morning, just as the sun would touch the long, white, snowy slopes, we'd climb and climb, and then we would start the long descent back down to the cabin. Looking today at the pictures of Mount St. Helens, of the devastated area and the collapsed mountain, it's hard to believe we ever skied there. We had to ship the bulldozer by freight to Kremling, Colorado. Kremling, I thought to myself. I sure hope we don't have to confront that depressing freight man who gave me such a hard time on my only trip to that town. Of all the things we have, which were mighty few, Max assured me this cat might keep the wolf from our cabin door in Colorado. Little did we dream that this machine would be the first bulldozer which would help build the early trails and clear the lift line at what was to become the Arapahoe Basin ski area the very next summer. The logging truck was loaded with what furniture we had, plus all the canned goods from our wartime victory garden. There were boxes of carrots, turnips, blueberries, apples, cherries, and even salmon. I took the train with the children while Max drove the logging truck. His dad, wanting to see what Colorado looked like, followed with our little Ford convertible. Trailing behind the Ford was the same two-wheel trailer with even more stuff. It took them 12 days across the West. It must have made quite a procession. After my arrival in Boulder, where Bestmore and my sister Martha lived, I awaited Max's phone call from Dylan. It seemed forever. I was so eager to see old Summit County again and all of our good friends up there. Max and his dad drove down to Boulder, and leaving the children with Bestmore, they drove me back up to Dylan. Dimp and Lula had already decided that we couldn't possibly live at our ranch. There was no electricity. But that wasn't the real problem. Dimp and Lula didn't have any electricity either. Well, the nearest connection was in Dillon, 6 miles away. The truth is, the ranch house was just too filthy. Having been uninhabited during the war, it needed a lot of work to make it livable. It's not fit for living, something for lots of mice, pack rats, and squirrels, Lula said. But I think the folks up the road, about a mile from here, want to sell their cabin and go to live with their children in Idaho. Let's go talk to them. We drove past our ranch and up the road to a low-roofed cabin nestled against the slope of a steep, craggy mountain, which we later learned was Porcupine Mountain. The tall dead trees on the ridge made the top of the mountain look like it had sprouted sharp porcupine quills. The old couple in the cabin welcomed us warmly. There were many unpeeled log sheds around the place, plus a big unfinished barn. They showed us the spring nearby where we could get pure, clear water. The neat log privy behind the cabin had a brightly painted green door. The roof of this little cabin slanted almost to the ground in the rear. The door entered directly into the kitchen, and beyond the kitchen were two teeny bedrooms side by side. The log wall was only 2 feet high at the north end of both of the bedrooms. The kitchen had 3 windows, one to the east, one to the south right next to the door, and one to the west. The sun could warm this little room, which would be our living room and dining room also. They showed us a trapdoor in one of the bedrooms with steep steps leading down into a dirt cellar. Here was where they stored all their produce and canned goods, and we would too. You see, Lula explained to me, if you go to Denver for a few days, everything will freeze if you leave it in the cabin. You got to store all the stuff you don't want freezing in the cellar. We call them root cellars here, and everybody's got one. Here was a place into which we might move in right away. We drove back to Boulder and fetched Bessmore and the children. Bessmore fell in love with the old cabin nestled among the tall Engelmann spruce and lodgepole pines. She bought the cabin, mining claims and all, and in we moved. Several months later, Max wanted to rip down the poorly built goat sheds. In one shed behind the top sidewall logs and the roof, he discovered some 6-inch cylindrical objects. He figured he'd better ask Dimp what they could be. "My God, Max, don't touch them," said Dimp. "Them's frozen dynamite." Being an old-time miner familiar with dynamite, Dimp managed to carefully dispose of them in the river. Dimp explained to Bessmore and to us about the difference between mining claims and mining patents. "This here is a claim," he said, "and the cabin sets on a mill site. It's called the Des Moines Mill Site. But the mine is the Alhambra mine. If you look way up above the rock slide along the left side of Porcupine Mountain, you can see the portal. Ain't much of a portal, and I don't rightly know if anyone's worked it, but you'll have to do $100 a year assessment work on the mine and the mill site to keep them. Otherwise, someone will jump your claim. You might try going for a patent. I'll explain all about that sometime later." Evidently, the old couple who sold the place to Bessmore weren't interested in mining. They kept goats in all those low connecting sheds. Dim told us the place was known as the Goat Ranch, or Cold Springs, or just the Alhambra Mine Place. Quite a choice, but we soon were calling it the Alhambra. We had a couple of weeks of golden weather. We would have some income as Max had the job of building a mining road for Dimp and his small mining company. The road was to the hunky-dory mine up above the old ghost town of St. John. And rather than stay in the cabin on those beautiful days, I'd pile the children in the car and drive up to Montezuma. What a lovely setting for all the old buildings still in use up there. There were 2 quite large hotels, 3 stories each, but the white paint on them was so old they looked gray. Along both sides of the dirt road, which was the main street, were several false-fronted buildings. One, a pool hall. A little way above town sat a prim, pristine white schoolhouse with steeple and bell. Perched up there, it looked like a stern schoolteacher looking down over the town. And the log cabins scattered among the spruce on the green, grassy hillsides. In every direction, we could see the high peaks already dusted with snow. I had never seen so many golden aspens, entire mountainsides so aflame that they seemed to be lighted from within. The thin air was crisp and cold, except when we stood in the warm sunshine. I walked with Rolf and Sonny along narrow mining roads. We rested on a knoll near a fallen down cabin at a huge mining dump. Silence was everywhere. Walking on farther, we came upon a small working mine where the squeak of machinery could be heard. Wood smoke from the cabins in the town would drift up the valley and mingle with the pungent smell of the mineral earth warmed by the sun. I showed the children how to crush juniper berries for another tantalizing odor. When Bessmore was a young girl in Norway, I told them, she used to make juniper ale for Christmas from the berries. One morning we awakened to a dark sky. Snow was whistling by our cabin. Shortly after breakfast, Dimp drove up in his battered red pickup. Coming in and stomping the snow off his boots, he said, "Well, Max, guess mining'll have to wait till spring, so bring your cat down off the mountain." Backing up to warm himself at the open oven door, he stated, "Then we'll start cutting firewood. You haven't got enough wood here. You'll need a sight more to get through the winter. This is a darn good little cook stove you have, but it'll sure eat up the wood." "Just how long does winter last up here in the Montezuma Valley in Dillon?" I asked Dim. "Well," he looked at me seriously, "if summer comes on a Sunday round here, we have a baseball game." And Max laughed. "Guess we'd better get in more wood then." I looked at my shiny black Home Comfort cook stove standing in the corner of the kitchen. Home Comfort was on the upper two warming oven doors, and again in raised letters of the cast iron on the small front door, where I'd shove in the aspen logs. Well named little stove, I decided.